Welcome to the COBB install guide for Focus ST Sway Bars. You'll need a 10, 13, 15, 17, and 21 mm socket and ratchet and 15 and 17 mm wrench. You should have everything shown here. Start by jacking up the front of the car and removing the front wheels. Remove the 3 T30 Torx screws securing the air skirt. Remove the air skirt. Remove the 8 T30 Torx screws securing the Undertray, then remove the tray. Now remove the 4 15mm bolts and 2 15mm nuts securing the subframe cross brace. Remove the 2 10mm bolts securing the downpipe isolator bracket. After removing the bolts, unseat the bracket. Remove 2 13mm bolts securing the oval bracket. Remove the oval bracket. Remove 3 13mm nuts. Remove the 13mm nut securing the downpipe support bracket. Then remove the 15mm bolt securing the bracket. Now you can remove the downpipe bracket or set it aside, or discard if using the COBB downpipe. Then remove the 15mm stud securing the rear motor mount. Then remove the 15mm bolt securing the bracket. Remove the 13mm stud securing the rear motor mount. Then remove the rear motor mount and Dogbone and set them aside for now. Now support the front subframe with a jack. Then loosen the 15 and 17 mm studs to disconnect the end links from the front sway bar. Use a 15 mm socket and 17 mm wrench to turn the stud. Then remove the two 15 mm front subframe bolts. Use a really long extension for easier access. Remove two 13 mm and one 21 mm rear bolts for the front subframe. Remove the three 15 mm steering rack bolts. Now use the jack to slowly lower the subframe slightly for clearance to remove the front sway bar. Remove the two 21 mm bolts securing the sway bar brackets. Use a 21 mm socket and 17 mm wrench to hold the nut on the other side. Now remove the front sway bar. Pry off the factory sway bar brackets. Be sure to note the orientation for which is inside and outside. Grease the new sway bar bushing and then press it onto the bracket. Install the OEM brackets with new bushings onto the COBB Sway Bar. Mount the COBB front sway bar. Thread the 4 21mm bolts and 17mm nuts securing the sway bar brackets. Tighten the 2 21mm bolts securing the sway bar brackets. Reinstall 2 13mm and 1 21mm rear bolts for the front subframe. Now tighten the bolts for the front subframe. Reinstall 2 15mm front subframe bolts. Then reinstall the 3 15mm steering rack bolts. Reconnect the Endlinks to the sway bar, then tighten the 15 and 17mm studs. Reinstall the downpipe bracket. Reinstall and tighten the 3 13mm nuts. Reinstall the oval bracket and inserts. Reinstall and tighten two 13mm nuts. Reinstall the undertray and 11 T30 Torx screws. Reinstall two 10mm bolts to secure the downpipe isolator bracket. Mount the subframe cross brace and reinstall four 15mm bolts and two 15mm nuts. Now we'll jack up the rear of the car and remove the rear wheels. Remove the 15mm nut to disconnect the rear sway bar end link. Remove the four 13mm bolts securing the rear sway bar brackets. Remove the rear sway bar. Grease the new bushing and slide it onto the COBB rear sway bar. Mount the COBB sway bar and bracket. Reinstall the four 13mm bolts to secure the sway bar brackets. Reconnect the sway bar end link and reinstall the 15mm nut. Then just reinstall the wheels, lower the car, and you're done. With the COBB sway bars installed, handling is sharper and more predictable than stock, making the most of your Focus ST. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.